Hi, everyone. So wonderful to see you and to spend time with you. My name is Katerina Stoikova. I am the founder and senior editor of Accents Publishing. We're an independent press in Lexington, Kentucky. Every other week, more or less, we plan to bring you an author of a book published by Accents Publishing and focus on this author and that book for an hour. So far, we featured Lita Kendricks and Luckier, and we featured The Junkie Who Loved Horses, an anthology of poems written by formerly incarcerated men, Christopher McCurry's Open Burning. And next month, on December 2nd, we will feature Eric Scott Sutherland's book, Earth is My Church. And also on the 16th of December, we will have a reading of, joint reading of all authors who decide to show up of our literary accents journal. We're excited about all these events. You are invited. And if you want to keep up with us, write to me and I'll make sure that you get all the invitations in the news. One great thing about poetry events is that there are no random people who attend poetry readings. Everybody is here because they want to be here. Everybody here knows who Frank X. Walker is and already has heard of the book. And I believe that there are quite a few that have already read it. I am thankful to Frank for trusting Accents with his books. This is the third that we have published. Besides the book of the hour that we're going to talk about today, we have published this one, Last Will, Last Testament, and About Flight. All of them amazing books. So I am thankful to Frank for trusting us with his work. I am thankful to Shanna Morgan for writing the intro to the book. I am thankful to Kevin Nance for the article that came out yesterday, the Herald Leader. I am thankful to each and every one of you for being here and for choosing to spend your time celebrating Masked Man Black. I am thankful to the people who entered the poem reading competition. The winning videos are Kevin Lane Deringer's reading of Mrs. Butterworth, Uncle Ben, and Aunt Jemima, Walk into a Bar in America, and Catherine Mackey's reading of I'm Being Sarcastic. Thank you. Kathy and Kevin, send me the title of any Accents Publishing book you want to have, and I'll send you your reward. Before I ask Shanna to speak, I would like to say a few words about Frank. There are those rare individuals whom everyone remembers, who impact everyone's lives. These people do not go through their lives unnoticed, even though they don't particularly clamor for attention. These people are our role models. They carry the spirit and power the rest of us strive to embody. We remember these people and cherish our interactions with them. Frank X. Walker has been one of these people for me. I've wanted to be like him since I first saw him read from Buffalo Dens in Louisville over a decade ago. To me, Masked Man Black, besides great poetry, is an emotional book. It depicts the poet's immediate reaction to events and attitudes that have come to a head in the year of 2020. And when an accomplished poet such as Frank speaks, the rest of us listen and try to hear everything that is being said. Let's hear, let's learn, let's understand. Now, please help me welcome Dr. Shauna Morgan.
Thank you so much, Katerina. Thanks. It's great to see so many folks here. Thank you for those very warm words about Frank. I think I could echo much of what you've said. That was indeed a beautiful introduction, as Marianne says in the chat. So I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you, Katerina, for inviting me. I'm thrilled to have had the honor of writing the introduction for this book. In many ways, Frank's work is engaged in a practice of liberation, something that has preoccupied my intellectual work and lived experience. And as I noted in the introduction, this collection does not hesitate, right, in its engagement of those discomforting realities of our world. With what I'm calling an aesthetic of the people, it sends vibrations in every line, tremors and shock waves, which echo and illuminate the truths that we need to hear. This work is, as Robin D.G. Kelley notes, not what we simply recognize as formal poetry, but it is a revolt. It is a scream in the night, as he said, an emancipation of language and the old ways of thinking. Masked Man in Black challenges us to uncover a freer and bolder future. And I'm just so proud to be connected to this work. And thank you again for the opportunity. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Shauna. I would love for us to hear from Frank.
Wow. Wow. Who is that woman? Can you hear me, Katerina?
Yes.
Okay, because maybe it's my Wi-Fi. It's freezing up a little bit there. So you want me to read some of these poems, I take it? Now's a good time?
Yes, please. Tell us about the book and whatever you want to say about the making of the book and whatever you want to read for us, then we'll have questions for you.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm gonna assume everybody has read Kevin's article, but I think it did a good job capturing the backstory. You know, I think many of us with books or in the book business think what you pulled off is impossible to, I mean, given the length of time between the first poem and pulling the first book out of the box, it's some kind of record. But I think it's not, it doesn't really seem out of place. I think about 2020. I mean, this year has been a year of nothing is normal. All the rules have been turned upside down. So whatever you expect or plan or hope for, you probably got something else if it was this year. So I think that for me, given the fact that I was just trying to catalog and keep up with everything that was happening, there was so much happening at the same time. I had to choose some days which poem I would try to write and which topic I would fixate on overnight and try to write the next morning. But, and it feels like the roller coaster year there's been has not even slowed down. I think the election and the aftermath, the kind of nonsensical place that we are in seems very tied to the things that the book was trying to capture. You know, there could almost be a part two, but I don't think anybody can handle any more poems. I know this household can't for now. But these poems start in the, I guess, the hotbed, to borrow one of Nikki Finney's words, that is and was and still is and will be until even after a vaccine, not just COVID, but what our lives look like after COVID. And I say our, but I'm sure it's affected everybody differently. As a teacher, it feels strange to have been teaching for a whole semester and not to have been in the same room with any of my students, to only have seen them in a little rectangle on a screen is a different kind of education. Not what I signed up for. I'm trying to do the best I can in that space, and I'm hoping students get something that feels like it was my best effort. And at the same time, to be on Zoom so often, some days, all day long, it's just a strange phenomenon. What I miss most, I would say, is, and I'm frustrated by at the same time, is when I'm part of a Zoom event that was supposed to happen somewhere else. If not for COVID, my whole family would have been in Oregon at Fish Trap at a conference this summer. Last month, I would have been, and I'm sure they would have also come along, in the Bahamas at a literary conference. But instead of being in the Bahamas and in New York and in California and Oregon, to be just in my house in the same room has been a little frustrating and a little saddening. But if we can survive this, then it was all worth it. So I hope these poems, are useful to other people, that they think about this as it's almost like having a yearbook at the end of your high school year or college year. It's pulling out your yearbook and remembering, where you were in that moment. I think these poems do a good job of trying to capture the things that were happening in our world most of the summer and in the spring. But when you read this book, you won't find them in that particular order. I think that for the sake of poetry and the power of poetry, I think that we have them assembled in a way that feels like a good meal, to fill yourself up and to not let your heart plate get too full, and then wash it down with something that may be funny, depending on your sense of humor. I worry that Kevin Nance's article and all the references to my use of satire and the darkest version of it, didn't misrepresent the fact that I really do love to laugh. This is a family that laughs a lot. And if not for all that laughter, I think it would be harder to do anything that we do over the course of a day or over the course of this life. So that feels like enough rambling. I'm just gonna read a group of poems and then stop reading when it feels appropriate, and hope that you have some questions that I might have an answer for. I'll try to give a little backstory to some of these poems to place them so that you'll find where you are anchored in your own lives in the same space. I think that hopefully most of these will feel familiar to you. The first one I'm gonna read is a poem called Silver Linings. And if you're following along, it's the first poem in the book. And I just recall, while everybody was still complaining about being sheltered in place or being locked in the house, or even talking about it feeling like prison, I really had a hard time accepting that, having visited many good friends and relatives in prison. It was never like prison. I think people were just frustrated with having to slow down and move that slow. So I wanted to open up with a poem that talks about some of the good things that came out of a bad situation, and then move from there. This is called Silver Linings. Remembering you actually like your family, love your partner, and being outdoors barefooted, finishing the unread stack of books, cooking without using a microwave, and writing letters longhand, noticing that watching, listening, and playing in the rain feels the exact opposite as driving in it. Meeting the old you, the cloud watching wannabe gardener before time clocks and hurry, bills and worry made you a prisoner, took your life hostage, replaced it with cable, a big screen, and a remote control. You know, a lot of people talked about binging on different series and then eventually run out of things to watch. I think we did our own fair share of TV watching, but eventually we got bored with television and made our way outdoors and spent a lot of time gardening during this COVID season. We still have some things out back that probably did not survive last night's frost, but it's just hard to just give up on it already. Between gardening and setting up bird feeders all around the house, you know, we had a lot of reason to just sit and stare out the window. You know, we live fortunately very close to a park, and before and after it was illegal to be in the parks, you know, we made sure that we got down there when nobody else was there and let our 2-year-old just run free. You know, if anything, he felt a little cooped up. He enjoys being outdoors, but for him at 2, this is normal. He doesn't know what life is supposed to be like. This is normal for him. I'm going to read a poem that tries to speak to the kind of general attitude of gardening in our house, and the difference between my relationship with our gardens and my wife's relationship. This is called Baptism by Dirt for Shauna. All believers know about the power of water, though not enough about the power of dirt. My mama used to walk barefoot in our vegetable garden, get down on her hands and knees and almost pray in the dirt. My wife and I and our 2-year-old built and planted 3 raised bed gardens. Watching her dip her fingers into the dirt to coddle what will feed us reminds me of mama and then. What is it that women know about nurturing a seed into a piece of fruit, about believing in the power of dirt and suns and water? I return from our labor with sore knees and back, fingernails and hands caked with dirt. She floats back into the house, cleaner, somehow less burdened, as if she spent the weekend burying all her heavy things, as if she whispered to something sacred, and it whispered something back. So that's one of our favorite poems, you know, not for just a personal reason that it's tied to, but for the memory of my mother that it conjures up. So it's always wonderful when she visits us via poem or memory or dream. We still enjoy her presence. I'm going to read a poem that comes right out of the headlines, or it may have come from one of the governor's announcements when he was starting the daily COVID report. And I started thinking about, you know, how it affected kids, you know, as a parent and a grandparent, and having kids in this house and watching it up close. We realized how fortunate we were when we started hearing that kids weren't immortal. They weren't, you know, off the list of potential COVID victims. So this is called To the 10-Year-Old Kid on a Ventilator. The coronavirus sucks, don't it? I bet you miss your friends and even school right now. This wasn't supposed to be the test you dreaded, once you never had a chance to prepare for. You're supposed to be counting down the remaining days till summer, rushing to be first in line, not the first child in critical condition. All I remember about 5th grade was my first pair of thick glasses and memorizing the Gettysburg Address. That hardly compares to a global pandemic and shelter in place, but being stuck inside probably sounds better than being stuck by needles. I'm sure you'd trade those doctors and nurses for a knucklehead brother or a bothersome sister right now. When I was 10, I dreamed about what I wanted to be when I grew up. You are in ICU dreaming about having a chance to. I can't help but feel like we failed you somehow. Yeah, these poems are, I think, all over the map emotionally. You may hear a little voice in the background. I'm gonna move into a different space for these poems and read a handful of the ones that deal with the protests that had been happening, but really picked up in a really strong and more advertised, not just advertised, but covered way by the media after the death of George Floyd. And this is called Complicit at Most, and it's in the voice of the knee of the policeman that lynched Mr. Floyd in public. Complicit at most. I am no more guilty than the officer's eyes choosing to look the other way. Technically, I'm not even touching his neck. All I could feel was the hot cotton insides of Officer Chauvin's slacks against my skin. Almost 9 minutes is a long time to kneel on a neck, especially if you are not accustomed to praying or begging. But after pressing all of me down, he put this all on me as if he was planning to propose, but got cold feet and was too embarrassed to get up and just walk away from this altercation, marrying us both to this moment till death do us part. These are the kind of poems that are not happy poems. They're full of the truth, which makes them sad. Some people read these and respond in different ways. I guess it depends how far or close you are to the subjects. I read a poem called Mrs. Butterworth, Uncle Ben, and Aunt Jemima. And it pulls at least 3 different stories from the news, but tries to disguise them, I think in a veil of metaphor to the point where you may miss which news story I'm talking about. But Mrs. Butterworth, Uncle Ben, and Aunt Jemima walk into a bar in America. Butterworth says, "I'm being repackaged." Ben says, "I'm being rebranded." Jemima says, "I remember when they branded my mama on her back." The bartender says, "I could stand in the middle of Main Street and kill somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters." Butterworth says, "Then I'll take 8 bullets in my sleep." Ben says, "Choke me to death with your knee." Jemima says, "Lock me in a holding cell and say I decided to hang myself." The bartender poured the drinks, said he felt threatened and was simply standing his ground when he thought the thug was reaching for a gun. The headline said, "Well-loved American foods resisted arrest, failed to comply, and were delicious while Black." Butterworth's daughter said, "Here's to progress. We might finally get an anti-lynching bill." Ben's son said, "I'd rather they abolish qualified immunity." Jemima's kid said, "They abolished slavery once. Then they hung my mama on that box." I hope that landed for you in the place it was designed to land. It was hard to listen to the news and not feel empathetic about different people's struggles, depending on what you did in the world. While many of us were locked inside, there were some people who were considered first responders or essential workers who didn't get the privilege of staying home. And they were in places where the companies had not figured out, what was needed to do to protect their workers, so they didn't worry about it. So when I read the stories and started seeing the news media pieces that dealt with individuals in meat packing plants and how they didn't have enough PPE, and how many of them were getting sick and taking that COVID home to their families, it really hurt. So this is called Ode to Meat Packers. There's a Guardian article that said the US has been hardest hit with outbreaks of COVID-19 at more than 180 meat and processed food plants. And you know who works in those plants for less than minimum wage. So Ode to Meat Packers. Oh, you of tired feet, sore hands, weary second shift eyes, and darker minimum wage skin. The executive order signed by the president to keep your plants open, to keep meat in grocery stores and on America's tables, despite the need for more spacing on your lines, personal protection equipment, more sanitizing stations and barriers to separate workers, at least implies you are now essential. Forget that ICE raids, families at the border, and children still in cages. Ignore the prioritizing of beef over ventilators, pork over vaccines, and poultry over tests. Now that it's considered patriotic for somebody to die for the economy. Take heart in case you missed out on a signed stimulus check. His autograph on the order makes it clear that he takes responsibility this time and almost acknowledges your sacrifice and your place in the supply chain to satisfy America's appetite. Kevin's article referred to a poem about my family. The backstory is really, really important because this was right before Easter, and we were struggling with this idea that this outbreak was not going to go away. It was not getting better. It was only getting worse. And if you didn't wear a mask and practice social distancing and sanitize your hands and wash your hands, there was an increased chance of contracting the virus. And this seemed to be a very obvious thing in my circle until I went home to visit my family in Danville, and I saw that almost nobody was wearing masks. And conversations with them revealed that not only did they not take it seriously, some of them believed that it was a hoax of the same news story and misinformation that was being fed on a certain news channel. Well, a channel on television, I won't call it a news channel. But because of their choices, it really made it hard to make the decision to not go home for Easter because, we have people we care about and we have responsibilities, and it just wasn't worth taking that risk as much as we loved our family. So this is called Easter Prayer 2020 AC. The AC is for after Corona. There's some debate about whether or not this is funny or if it's just satire and parts are funny or not at all, but you can decide. And it's meant to be read as a prayer. All-powerful Black Jesus, please protect my brothers and sisters and their families and friends when they gather together illegally to enjoy Easter dinner and the Sabbath. May they pass around the sanitizer after holding hands in prayer. May whoever is lifting up your name be wearing a mask correctly, O Lord. May any pork that touches their lips not mess with their blood pressure. Hide the salt, sweet Jesus, and please grant them the vision to bring at least one sugar-free dessert, some diet sodas, and unsweetened tea. Strengthen them for their fight against that devil diabetes and all cancers, Lord. Thank you for their on-time unemployment checks, Medicaid, and Obamacare. Help them choose wisely if the choice is between the cable and light bill and their life insurance. And if it is your will to take all they ask us because they refuse to believe COVID-19 is real, let this be the best meal they ever ate, Lord. And take them all on the same day so that they may visit and offer comfort to each other in the hospital and allow the rest of us to endure only one drive-through service. Amen. And I'll just read a few more. I hope you aren't disappointed if you thought these would be a bunch of angry poems. But I'll read one that conjures up my 2-year-old who I can hear in the background. This is called I'm Being Sarcastic. Our 2-year-old grabbed the mic, pronounced his uneaten slice of watermelon a boat, and sailed it off his plate onto the dark blue sea table mat, becoming the after-dinner entertainment instead of the evening press conference. And as soon as we were all convinced he was right, he picked it up, smiled slyly, took 2 quick bites, and pronounced it a race car. I thought, my God, he could be president. As I imagined him in a big red tie instead of his signature bib, the second ever toddler to take a dump in the Oval Office. We all thought telling little white lies and dressing up like a clown was cute until the German kid opened up her real science kit. Our problem child makes unflyable paper planes out of the Constitution, uses fat crayons to color his talking points, pretends to know more than all the experts, and waits for the adults in the room to clean up after his latest mess. That's a metaphor. I'm going to close with a poem that for me is one of the more beautiful poems in here. And it's, if you can imagine a large protest gathering in Philadelphia, thousands of people in the street, and a couple come out of the courthouse who have just gotten married, and they're in their tuxedo and long, beautiful white wedding dress, and they join the protests and participate. This is for Carrie Ann and Michael in Philly. Y'all say I do, we say Black Lives Matter. Carrie Ann and Michael. What a powerful way to say till death do us part. To stand in defiance of murder after murder after murder and still choose life together. To seal your vows and then march for all our promises into Philly streets, swollen with protesters, where they replaced rice with tear gas and pepper spray. It still felt more like a large reception for freedom than a riot. Resplendent in wedding gown and tuxedo, fists raised high to demonstrate that Black love is the liberation married to the joy that fills your faces. Thinking only of the honeymoon where all couples know justice because Black couples know peace. That feels like a good place to stop, and my throat is starting to slow down. Maybe it's a good time for questions if you have any.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, I hope you guys have a few questions. Unmute your mic and ask them. If you don't, I have some questions. Go ahead, Marianne.
I wanted to ask Frank,
Hi, Marianne.
Hey, since these poems came so fast, one a day in April, right, and beyond, I wonder how much you worked on shaping and revising the poems, or if a lot of the poetic features of the poems were just sort of intuitive and pretty much came in place without too much struggle. I'm thinking about rhythm and rhyme, line breaks, imagery, etc.
Yeah, thank you. I would I would have loved it if it was that easy. If I could just get away with the first draft, the first emotional response that came. Um, but not only that, I continue to draft the poems even well after they were written. Um, my wife, who served as the first reader and editor for the book early on, uh, she was committed to not let me embarrass myself. And she was always quick to say if a poem wasn't ready to be shared with the real world beyond what we did on Facebook. There were some poems that didn't make it to this collection, quite a few actually. They just weren't good enough. And I knew it was a tight deadline once, we made the commitment to try to do a book. Because it was summertime, and I didn't have to teach. I had most of the day to work on poems. And so we spent a lot of days and nights trying to give it the same kind of real time we've had if it was a normal pace in a different time. Even though it probably happened in, say, half a year, 6 months, I think we did as much work as any book we would have spent on if we had taken a whole year to do it. So in hindsight, I would like to have added even more poems. I would like to have even focused on form. And I think that kind of craft detail is something I had to sacrifice and allow the poems to just be the form they came out in or that they seemed most comfortable in. But it was still very satisfying to read them and see the variety of poems there. And find those things that still were about craft and rhythm and rhyme and alliteration and all those things that you mentioned. And I think, that I would like to think it's easier now after 13 books to compose in your head and to, but it's still, I won't say I don't have to work as hard. I think it's a little easier, not because it's less work, it's easier because it's more familiar. And because it was summer, there were whole days where I could devote the entire day to a single poem and its best, final version of itself. Because somebody else was taking care of the kids and somebody else was taking care of the food and allowed me the privilege and opportunity to just get the poems right. So I couldn't have done it by myself. I think we all contributed to some degree. But yes, there's still craft there, and it was not easier. But I think they were harder because I think the wounds that some of these poems came out of were still fresh. I've written about some things in my life in different books that initially I couldn't touch, I wouldn't touch or even read them because the wound was still too wide open. So these were raw in that sense that, the blood was still on the page in a lot of cases. The dirt was still fresh on the grave in a lot of cases. There's a long poem that was, I believe, the last poem written for the book. It's called Old Death. And it talks about, all the lives lost. Some of my favorite entertainers, and songwriters and actors, have already left the planet this year and it's not over. There's still more death to come, unfortunately. But in that way, it was hard because it was quick. It was nothing that we had a chance to celebrate. I think we just felt fortunate that, we got it done and hope that people would find some sustenance in it. And thank you for that question. It's good to see you.
I was reading somewhere that you had written a book on Medgar Evers and called Turn Me Loose. And I was wondering if you could say something about that work. I've just recently become aware that you had written that particular book, but I don't know that much about it. If you could make some comments on Turn Me Loose.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for that question. Turn Me Loose, The Unghosting of Medgar Evers is one of, I guess, 5 collections that I've written that are in persona poems. The whole book is about Medgar's life and death. And the poems are rendered in the voices of the people most intimate with both of those situations. You know, the kind of star of the show is the antagonist, Byron de la Beckwith, who is the person who assassinated Medgar Evers. So he speaks a lot in the course of the book. His first and second wives have poems and participate in having a story told. The foil for de la Beckwith is Medgar's widow, Merle Evers, and she's present, as is Medgar's brother Charles. They all have voices. And the other voice that I not mentioned, beyond the voice of the bullet, that is also present, is the voice of history. And the historical voice, you know, operates like a Greek chorus, tries to fill in the blanks for those people who are unfamiliar with that part of the civil rights struggle or Medgar's life in general. You know, so all those poems are woven together to retell the story of Medgar's life and his subsequent death and the start of his legacy. And they're floated on this kind of this binary idea that there are, you know, 2 ways to experience the South. Either as a fan of the Confederate flag or as somebody who sees it as a victim, a flag that was carried by the Ku Klux Klan. You know, there's a North and the South. And there were 2 songs, Dixie and Strange Fruit, that are echoed over and over in the book that allow you to experience both the high and the low, and then 2 sides of this ideal of what that part of history was about and how it even felt. I think that is easier to follow in the book once you get the pages open. You know, it was put out by University of Georgia Press. Last time I checked, it was still doing pretty well. A lot of people, unfortunately, had never heard of Medgar Evers. You know, I had a chance to teach a large class at UK the year before I started writing the book, and I asked them in a conversation about, you know, what they knew or understood about the civil rights era as related to the men who were assassinated. And then they started naming the victims of those assassinations. And all of them got JFK and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, but that's as far as they could go. And none of them, and there were over 200 kids in that room, even mentioned Medgar Evers. And that shook me, that his legacy being what it is, that there was a whole generation of young people who didn't know who he was or how important he was. So that, along with the poem by Lucille Clifton, who imagined, you know, this idea of the easier life de la Beckwith had versus Medgar's family, because of that choice he made. Those 2 things inspired me to dig into the research and then subsequently write that book. And it's a quick read, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Feels like a collection of poetry. It's maybe about the same thickness and number of pages as this one, Masked Man Black. Mm-hmm. Hope that answers your question. The other books that deal with persona, there's one that's about Isaac Murphy and deals with the horse racing industry, thoroughbred industry here in Kentucky and Lexington specifically, and Isaac Murphy's life. And the other ones are about Lewis and Clark, but told from the point of view of York and the Native Americans who participated in the expedition that get very little attention in most historical accounts that we find in schools. Most schools talk about Lewis and Clark as if they were the only two people on the expedition, even though there were 42 people. And York, African-American manservant from Kentucky, was one of them. So that's also another important story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Frank, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I was actually wondering if you could recommend any poets or authors or songwriters who have a sense of humor or absurdity. Like my favorite poet is James Tate.
Mm-hmm.
You like James Tate, but I also like folks like Ishmael Reed or Dick Gregory, but somebody more obscure, if you could.
So an obscure poet with a sense of humor. Wow, that's a pretty heavy. Most of my poet friends, I don't know if we don't deal with humor, but I think there's always a really broad range of emotional treasure in most poetry books. I think there's humor in this collection. You know, there are love poems in this collection. There are poems that deal with death in this collection. But I think, you know, I usually read contemporary poets, and so they're writing about what's happening right now. And unfortunately, there's not much to laugh at right now. Poetry is not where I go to for humor. Although I love Trevor Noah and Steve Colbert, I mean, and SNL every weekend and late at night. I think that's some of the best writing and the best humor happening in America right now. I think poets are doing the heavy lifting and dealing with the things that just aren't funny right now. I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't.
If you allow me, Frank, I want to point out Mike Wilson. He's right here in our meeting, and he is an up-and-coming poet who just published his first book, which is satirical and funny and outrageous. It reminds me of the title of it, Mike, I don't want to get it wrong.
Arranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
There you go.
It's political poetry. And also Catherine Perkins, who was also in this group in a little bit ago and had to get off. But you know, if you attend open mic readings, there are some fantastic new poets who read funny poems. I love funny poems.
Yeah, thanks for filling that gap. It's
It's
not poetry, but one of my favorite hilarious writers is Robert Geip. He writes mostly fiction, but if you want to read something to make you laugh, that man will curl your hair for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more? There it is, Arranging Deck Chairs on the Titanic. Political poetry for a post-truth world. Rabbit House Press. Available on Amazon. Mike Wilson, it's a free commercial.
And Frank, what are your plans for next April? Are you going to write a poem a day also?
Yeah, you know, I try to do it every year. So I you know, I hope I'm not writing about COVID, but I suspect it'll still be around. But yeah, I'll do it again. It's, you know, usually, my poet friends, we've done some things that they really try to celebrate the spring and poetry. We used to do a spring break trip when many of us were students, and we would try to do as many readings in as many states as we could figure out in the course of 9 days. And one year we filmed all of that, and somewhere there's a potential film that could be put together from the footage from that. But those are the kind of things that make you miss Bianca Spriggs. She was a real treasure. That was the anchor for that, because she also had us up early in the morning on those trips with writing prompts and making sure that it was a productive, generative experience, and not just a road trip. But a lot of poets participate. I challenge all of you who write to join me next April, Poem a Day, and then share them publicly. Keep the pressure on.
And we have time for one more question.
What more?
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask a question. I'll turn on my camera so you can see me. Hello. So as we were sitting here listening to you today, we meaning Brantley and I was thinking about the concept of like the double consciousness and how like as you're writing your poetry, Brantley and I were sitting here laughing and kind of thinking like, oh, this is cool. But at the same time, it's understood that like sometimes audiences who may not be able to relate to that same experience might see it as angry or see it as you're being down on yourself or harming yourself with the realities of society. And so I was just thinking, and I don't know, I guess it's more commentary. I want to hear what you think. If it is an extension of that double consciousness of like, okay, well, this is what the reality of the situation is, and this is how I'm feeling through my words, poetry. And it's reflected in here, but also we can kind of see this sense, I don't want to say humor, but this, I don't know, this feeling through it, I guess, this lightheartedness, I guess. What do you think?
Yeah, if I understand your question, I would say that I think that's a fair assessment of what happens. And hey, Brantley, Mr. Hot Bread Man. But I think it's easier to think about it as a survival mechanism. I spend a couple of hours a day talking about and with a man's dissertation that's anchored in this idea of resiliency. And that has to do with a people's or an individual's or community's capacity to bounce back after something tragic has happened. And we were talking about the tools needed in order for that to occur, that to be like a rubber band, to look this ugly thing in the face, and to, if you're moved, be moved only a short distance and only temporarily, but to come back stronger somehow. Out of that idea comes phrases like, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. I don't know that I believe that in all cases, but I understand the concept, that those hard times, those rough times, those difficult times, if you survive them, that means something. It's really about what you used or what you needed to survive, what you had access to. And a lot of us recognize that we don't do it by ourselves. It's not because of anybody's individual strength. In most cases, we're fortunate and blessed enough to have a partner or a loved one or a family member who knows us so well. They know how to make us laugh when we need to do so. They know when we are in pain or suffering just by looking at how we move. You can show that pain and be smiling at the same time. There's a poem in the book that's based on Dunbar's "We Were the Mask" that is about that same thing and calls up this idea of multiple consciousness. But it is about, recognizing this place we live in, this space we live in, to make it even more real. How do we go forward and feel victorious about this election, whether he concedes or not, knowing that 72 million people in this country wanted him to be president again. How do you laugh at that? How do you really enjoy Biden's victory, knowing that there are that many people or that much polarization exists? You know, the short answer is you just do. You know, you can't or give up. And part of getting by it and getting through it is finding something to laugh about and somebody to laugh with. And I think that's the secret weapon. That's the secret to survival. And if you believe, you know, that you have to do it by yourself, then yeah, I think you're cheating yourself. You know, there are amazing platonic friendships out there in the world that exist, that bear fruit all the time. But even people who are not type A personalities or who feel more comfortable alone could be serving somebody else with the generosity of spirit and energy and knowledge. I think that's where, you know, true generosity comes from, when you're willing to make a choice, not based on what you need, but based on helping somebody else. And that's what feeds you, to see the joy or to see somebody else grow or develop. I think those attitudes, you know, are best served when they happen in the classroom. You know, that's the best kind of teaching out there. But that's a long answer to your question, and I'm glad you asked it and showed your face again. And I look forward to post-COVID so we can hug y'all again. I appreciate everybody who's listening. And if you find your way to this book, I hope you enjoy it. And I hope it hurts you in a good way, and that you understand the purpose of that hurt. And that you also find a joy in it. You know, it's another beautiful product from Accents. And big thanks to Katerina for all you do in the world. You make this literary community alive in Lexington. And it's nice to spend at least an hour and not think about any challenges, or just sit and enjoy a conversation and let it be about poetry. Where else in the world is that happening?
I hope everywhere in the world. I hope everywhere in the world people get together and talk about poetry, and just, you know, I can feel all the wonderful things that are happening in this room, this common virtual room. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I'll see you on December 2nd to celebrate Eric Scott Sutherland's book, Earth is My Church.
Come on.